Former model Linda Thompson.
Linda was with him for 4 years, from 72 to 76, and most of that time, you know, she stayed the same all the time. She dressed flashy. I mean, Elvis loved for her to dress that way, and yeah.
And she went through, this was during a period of kind of going downhill. She went through some stuff, and she probably saved his life.
You know, we've always contended, had she been there at Graceland when Elvis died, that she'd have checked on him and it never would have happened. She'd have got in there in time.
He had taken something one night in Las Vegas, and what do? He'd take these big green bombs, man, Placidel, and after a while, probably more than that. And then he'd wait for them to hit, and he'd eat or read or whatever, and he loved to get that feeling, you know. He would just sit there and go to sleep. And of course, she was always there to put him to sleep, make sure he was asleep. Well, he was eating an apple. He was laying down one night, eating an apple, and it hit him. And what he had in his mouth got stuck in his throat. You know, he was choking to death, and she happened to be there, flipped him over, and did whatever it took, and knocked it out.
You know, he was so.
Wait, 1 second, I want these big green things that they're talking about, or 750 Placidel, they're hypnotics.
He's called them green footballs.
Yeah, and that's what he was taking that would literally just knock him out. He could be eating, and it happens so quick when it hits, it's just within about 10 seconds, you go sound asleep. Go ahead, Lamar.
Elvis was very, you know, because he's such an insomniac, he was very nocturnal. He'd get up and wander around at night, or, you know, he'd come in your room and crawl in bed and start talking to you.
One night,
it was just strange.
Judy and I were in the room there. It was on a weekend when they had come over to visit, and everyone had gone. We'd been out in the suite earlier and everything, and then when Elvis went to his room, and we went to ours, and Red and Pat, they went to their room. So we're back there, and all of a sudden, there's a little tentative knock on the door. And I knew who it was, because no one else knocked like that. Elvis just, and I said, honey, I said, that's him. That's him. She said, well, go to the door. I said, no, I think he wants to talk or something. Man, we'll be out there forever. If he's fought off those sleeping pills, he's going to be out there forever. And he knocked again. She said, honey, you can't. I said, okay. So I went to the door, and it was Elvis. I said, hey, boy. He said, say, y'all sleeping? And I said, no. I said, he said, you think that y'all could come out here and we just sit and talk for a little while, you and Judy and everything? I said, sure. I said, sure. He said, oh, okay. And he left. I said, Judy, I shouldn't answer that door. I told you. So I put on my robe. I got my pajamas. I put on my robe. Judy puts on her robe and everything. And we go out there. And we're looking. He's not out there. No. He's not out there. I said, where? I thought, did he go out that wrong door out to the elevators or what? So I went, and the door was cracked open. I said, Elvis? No answer. I said, honey, stay right here. I went in and looked around, boy, and there he was in bed, sound asleep. That quick, it hit him from the time he thought, you know, he's going to fight him and talk for a while, but they overcame him, and I said, Judy, let's go. And I shut the door and went back. That's when he was like a little boy at times like that. Boy, that's when your heart just went out to him, and you thought, God bless him, you wanted to take care of him.
You're on tour, and he flew somewhere.
Oh, yeah, we was in Jacksonville, Florida, and undoubtedly, it was something he wanted. I don't know, man. We had just got there, and he said, I need, I don't know what kind of medicine he called it, something for pain, but he said, I'm going to fly to Memphis. And I said, well, who you going to see? I said, you got Dr. Nick here. And he said, he ain't got what I want. We got on the Lisa Marie, flew to Memphis, and I don't even know who the doctor was. I don't think Elvis knew who he was. He just picked somebody at random. And we go into his office and all that, and he's seeing other patients at this time. So he's talking to him for a minute, and the doctor said, well, excuse me, Mr. Presley, I'll be right back, and all that. He said, I got, a couple patients I need to see. And he said, but I'll be right back with you. He makes his round. While he makes his round, Elvis is going through his desk, and I mean, samples were going into this bag, boy, like you wouldn't believe. And he had a whole thing full of samples, and I don't have no idea what they were, but he did. I mean, he read these things, and he knew
the
exactly.
medications. So
I mean, he'd flush these over here and keep smacking these.
That's what he did. Yeah.
But we did make it back, thank goodness, in time for the show. But this is some of the things of how bad he was actually getting, you know, I mean, at this time.
Yeah, that's why I wanted you to bring that out to see how bad the last year was. Now, last night you were telling about 2 times he almost checked out. Well, one time they packed him in ice, and the other time was something else. It shot him in right here or something.
Him a shot directly into his
heart. Anyway, we was in Palm Springs, and this is pretty close, really. This is late '76, and we had flew to Palm Springs, and he was seeing this little girl. Really was seeing her for about the 2nd time. Anyway, he got out there, and he had taken a bunch of stuff, man. I don't know what all, because, you know, when he did it, he went in his bathroom, and you never knew. Anyway, his breathing got real shallow. He'd go, and it seemed like it'd be a minute and a half before he'd take that second breath. Well, the little girl that was with him panicked, and of course she run into our room, and she knocked on the door. I was out of it. I was sound asleep because I pretty well wore out at this time, and my wife, she happened to be up, and anyway, she goes in there, and he was still doing that same thing. He'd go, and that's the way it was. And then about a minute later, he'd take another one. It was almost like he wasn't getting his breath. And of course, I was getting just a little bit excited. And so she starts talking to him and trying to get him awake, and, you know, actually patting him on the face and shaking him just a little bit. Not a whole lot. You didn't do that. You know, you don't want to shock him. And she would get him to talking. We already pretty much had him, you know, kind of in focus a little bit by this time. But he come real close. If the little girl hadn't have been there, I think he would have checked out then. I really do.
The other time we were in Louisiana or North Carolina or something, where he was just laying across the bed. And I had gone in, and he was laying across the bed, and I said, you know, you're not moving. I said, you know, I shook him, and I said, are you awake? And no reaction. And I said, look, and she says, I forgot who else was in the room. I said, go down and get Nick. And I ran down the hall and banged on the room, and I said, I think Nick and Joe in there with somebody, whoever it was, and everything. I said, I need you right now. And he said, well, I'll be there in a minute. I said, no, now. I said, come here. I said, we got a big problem. Well, at that, he ran to the door and went down the hall, and he went into the bedroom. And he gave him a shot straight into here with Retlin or something like that, straight into his artery. And boy, it was like a John Travolta picture. He was straight up, just like that. He was out of it.
Well, when we got off of that tour, we were home a few days, and that's when he had his dad call everybody. He called them, and then he called me, and he said, Vernon said, Red, we've got to cut back on some expenses here. We're spending too much money, and we're going to have to let some people go. And I can't explain the feeling. I just felt empty after all these years, after all we'd gone through, but I knew, you know, I'd gone and come back. I knew I'd never go back. I knew this was it. It was over forever. I grew up with Elvis Presley. I grew up and became a middle-aged man with Elvis Presley, and then all of a sudden, it's over. I knew the drugs had him, they were going to get him, and there was no turning back, and I felt sick. And I said, I'm going to write a book about my life story, and with Elvis. And in this book, I was going to try one more time to wake this idiot up. And he called me, and we discussed the book. We had a long conversation. It's on tape. And he said, well, do what you got to do, Red. And I did.
Sometimes overprotect you, and that's the God's truth. We know what it is. Sometimes it's an old guy said, "Cool man, look, you took me to kick." Yeah. Right. Well, that's the God's truth. We sure didn't communicate in the last year or so. You have been pretty fucked up. He was so wrong on one thing. And listen, don't get paranoid, because I'm just talking to you as a friend. I'm on a private line into that fucking soul up. Right. I am not fucked up. I know me. On the contrary, I never been in any better condition in my life. You know, I went through a divorce. You know, you were there.
Yeah. What I'm saying...
That wedding thing. You know, that wedding thing. It was in there over and done with so quick. So I realized I was married.
Oh, yeah. Oh, you're talking about your wedding, yeah.
Yeah.
Let me say one more thing before you hang up. If everybody's worried about the book, tell them not to. If I can tell all from day one the good days.
You do whatever you have to do.
Okie doke.
I just want to let you and Pat know. I'm still here.
Okay. I appreciate that. Bye-bye.
After the publication of Red's book, Sonny West, Red's cousin and co-author, defends the tell-all book to reporters who question the motives of the friends and bodyguards.
When we wrote this book, it was out of bitterness and hurt to start with. I tell you, when we were given 3 days' notice by his father and his pay, after 16 years, 20 years, 2.5, 3 years with Dave, we all had families, and he wouldn't talk to us himself. He flew out of town, and he had his father do it.
With Elvis's drug habit now in print, Sonny offers an explanation for the expose.
What do you mean by that?
When I said maybe it will do some good for him, for the drug culture, for people to realize no one is out of reach of drugs, man. Here is a man that had it in the palm of his hand and started off with it that way, and the drugs took it away from him.
We all knew that how he was, and knew that if you pushed too much, you were simply out. If you were out, how in the hell were you going to help him?
That's right.
Yeah. You know, we knew the situation, so we're in here trying to do what we can, or what he'll allow you to do. I mean, I can't explain to you how many pills I lifted that would simply be there, and I'd say, well, you know, while I'm at it, shove a few over here and take it and simply flush it. But if he didn't get that feeling, he knew something was wrong, so you had to work real careful. I mean, it's literally, let me say that I stole from Elvis Presley. I did. I took pills, and I'd take Placidils and drain them suckers with a needle and then blow air back into them to hold them up, so because there'd be too many. And that way I cut down as best I could. But if he didn't get that feeling, boy, he was somewhere getting them. So you're damned if you do, and you're damned if you don't.
When I first went to work for him, I was like 21 years old. And he was like the big brother that had been out there and seen part of the world and everything. And I was learning from him, and he was taking care of us. At the end, it had reversed, where he was like a little boy that had gone off and gotten some trouble, and now we were trying to help him out and pull him through it. Just almost a reversal of the roles, you know.
By now, Elvis is pretty well hooked. Just like Red said, there wasn't no going back. And Elvis, be honest with you, was totally wore out. Mm-hmm. Totally. No. And Ginger came on the scene, Ginger Alden. Ginger is a very pretty woman, and she was young. Here's a 22-year-old that's got a lifestyle that she likes, and here's a 42-year-old that had done everything in the world and not too much interested him anymore. I mean, he had done it all. I mean, you know, whatever you name, he probably had done it. And he asked me one night, he said, what is it? He said, she acts like she don't want to be around sometimes. I said, Ginger likes showing you off. The fact that she's going with you, she wants her family to meet you, her friends to meet you. This is her way. And she enjoys nightclubs. She enjoys pool parties. I said, all the things you've already done. I said, now, in order to hold her, you've got to give a little. I mean, you've got to go to her lifestyle and not so much expect her to do all yours. And I've experienced a whole year of him and Ginger, and I am sick to the bone of it. And I told my wife, I said, man, I am sick of it. I'm tired of it. I said, I wish he would ditch her, get somebody else. I said, but nothing you say seems to change his mind. And I said, you know, I've just about had it. I said, I just can't handle it. She said, look, I never will forget that because it stood out. She said, just bear with him. She said, because, you know, we might not have him long. he had gone to the dentist to have a crown redone. After that, we came back to Graceland, and he went upstairs with Ginger, and I didn't find out till later what it was, because he normally, you know, he's up this time and he's wanting to do things, you know. So I asked him, I said, "You gonna be up?" And he said, "Yeah." He said, I'll probably call it a night," which was unusual. So about, I guess about 4 o'clock in the morning, I got this phone call, and he said, "Would you and Joe come out here?" I said, "Me and Ginger want to go down and play some racquetball." So we got dressed, and we go out there and meet him and go to the racquetball building he's got on his property. He had one built. And we're starting to play racquetball. Anyway, I kept hitting the ball. You almost had to hit it right to Elvis, because he was not going to move, you know. I mean, it's just that simple. So I'd hit the ball to him, and instead of him trying to hit the ball back, he was trying to hit me with it. And a couple of times succeeded. And boy, when he hit it hard, that ball would sting the fool out of you. So this one time, boy, I hit it real hard, and he swung at it. Boy, I mean, he was going to lay it on me this time, but he swung it, he missed it, and he hit himself on the shin. Oh. Well, he hollered, and here he goes limping out, and he sat down, and he started to raise his pants leg. When he did, I said, "Is it bleeding?" He said, "I don't think so." And I reached and got it, pulled it back down. I said, "Hell, if it ain't bleeding, it ain't hurting." And of course, he threw the racket at me at that time. And then he got on the piano, and he was playing the piano and all night. He sang some gospel song, just briefly, you know, just part of it. And then he got on "Blue Eyes Crying in the Rain," and he played that, and he pretty much went all the way through that one. And then I had asked him about Ginger. See, because it was strange for him to come from the dentist's office and stay in his room that long and then call me later. I knew something wasn't right. I knew he wasn't going to go to bed. So I asked him, I said, "Look," I said, "what was wrong?" I said, "You and Ginger came upstairs," and I said, "Later you called me, you know, play racquetball." I said, "Well, what's the problem?" He said, "Oh, hell," so she's not going on the first part of this tour. And he said, "That reminds me." He said, "You remember that little girl I took to Palm Springs?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Get in touch with her. I want her to go on the first part of the tour, and then before Ginger gets there, we'll send her back." So I said, "Okay." And we went up, you know, he got up, we went back to the house. And we go upstairs, and Joe waited downstairs. My wife waited downstairs for me. We go in the bathroom, and he's wanting me to wash and dry his hair. That's as close to a bath at that time as he got. Then we're talking about the tour, and I said, "Well," I said, "Are you up for the tour?" And he said, "Yeah." He said, I'm pretty well up for it." He said, "It's probably going to be one of the best tours I'll ever do." Really, what he's doing is psyching himself up. You know, I was glad to hear it, you know. So talk a while, and then after that, I leave. I go in the house. I ain't thinking nothing about it. I mean, we just had a fairly good time, you know. And kind of he was kind of up. So you know, I had no earthly idea, you know, what was going to take place in a few hours later. Somewhere around 1:30, if I'm not mistaken, the phone rang, and it was my cousin Patsy, and she's totally broke down, and she said, "Elvis is dead," and just like that, I said, "Patsy," I said, "wait a minute." I said, "You know, calm down a little bit." I said, "And tell me what's wrong." She said, "Well, they've taken him to the hospital and said he's dead." I said, "Patsy," I said, "now we've done this a lot of times." I said, "You know, this ain't the first time." I said, "It's probably just another one of those situations where he couldn't breathe good." And I said, he'll be all right. And to me, you know, I mean, I could never imagine Elvis dead. I mean, the man was bigger than life to me. So she insisted that he was dead, so I hung the phone up, and I told my wife, I said, "I got to go to the hospital." I said, "Elvis is in the hospital." And she said, "What's wrong?" I said, "Well, Patsy says he's dead." I said, "But, you know, maybe when we get there, everything will be, you know, okay." So I ran out of the house, and the only thing I could think about was jumping on my motorcycle. I had to get there, and I didn't care how, you know. And when I went in, Charlie and Joe were standing there, and Charlie grabbed me and he said, he's gone. And Joe said, and he was crying, and he said, he said, "Elvis is gone this time." I said, No, man. I said, he can't be. I said, where's Dr. Nick? He said, he's in the other room with him. I said, well, then there's still hope here. And about that time, the door opened, and Dr. Nick, he walked out, and he's got these tears running down his eyes. And he reached and grabbed me, and he said, he's gone. He said, do you want to see him? And I said, I don't think so.
I just got mad at him because he died. I said, you had no right. I said, you deprived everybody of a lot of good things. And I said, you had no right to die. I wanted to jerk him up out of the casket and shake him. I just felt like he didn't have a right to die. I didn't think it was right.
His ways have affected us. Always will.
Oh,
we pattern a lot of our ways after him,
We just, everything, I guess outside of my father, he was the closest thing I had. And when we lost him, we sort of all lost part of ourselves. We never, ever recovered. We all do something every day like he did. And we all do things like he did, and we can't help it. It's just part of our lives. And it's not easy. We still miss him a lot, an awful lot.
Even if we wanted to, which none of us do, to cut him out from inside, we can't.
We don't know any better. We just, we grew up, around him, and the things we do sometimes are not right. But what else do we know?
One thing I'll say is,
what else do we know?
This helps me a lot. I will see him again.
Yeah.
I will see him.
I'm sure we'll have to get an appointment.
If there's any way, and Elvis ever had a doubt that we cared for him, I think this right here, if he's able out there somewhere to visualize it or see it, the doubt's gone.
Oh, yeah.
It's got to be gone.
It's funny, it's been 20 years now, almost. And it started out with a little group. Others came along. They've all gone, but the original group is sitting right here.
Mm-hmm.
We were part of something unique. We didn't even realize what we were a part of until after it was gone. And we spent a lifetime with a legend from the time we were kids until we were grown men, and it was a hell of an experience.